The year is 1964. The Cold War is the world's most stressful, long-running reality show, and everyone is terrified of communism. In America, there's this fashionable idea called the domino theory, which suggests that if one country in Southeast Asia falls to communism, they'll all start toppling over like a line of poorly stacked books. Enter Lyndon B. Johnson, a president who desperately wanted to be remembered for his domestic policies, the Great Society, but was also terrified of looking weak. He needed a reason, any reason, to look tough in Vietnam without actually having to ask Congress for a formal declaration of war. Because asking for permission is so much work. He just needed a little push, a convenient crisis, a spark. And the U.S. Navy was about to provide him with one, whether it was real or not. So, the United States had these things called Desoto patrols. These were missions where destroyers, like the USS Maddox, would sail very close to the coastlines of countries like China, North Korea, and North Vietnam. Officially, they were just showing the flag. Unofficially, they were giant floating vacuum cleaners for electronic intelligence, sucking up every radio signal and radar emission they could find. To make things spicier, these patrols were coordinated with something called Operation 34A. This was a CIA-run program of South Vietnamese commandos raiding North Vietnamese coastal installations. So you have the Maddox hovering just offshore, listening intently, while South Vietnamese boats are blowing things up nearby. The North Vietnamese, not being complete idiots, started connecting the dots. They figured the giant American spy ship might have something to do with the people currently shooting at them. On August 2nd, 1964, the inevitable happened. After 34A commandos had just attacked some nearby islands, 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats made a run at the Maddox. It was a real, actual attack. Torpedoes were fired. Machine guns were used. The Maddox, being a much larger ship, fired back with its 5-inch guns. U.S. fighter jets were scrambled from a nearby aircraft carrier and strafed the North Vietnamese boats. One U.S. aircraft was damaged, and the North Vietnamese boats were heavily damaged, limping away. No American casualties. Washington was thrilled. An unprovoked attack? The perfect excuse. Except it wasn't unprovoked at all. It was the entirely predictable consequence of sailing a spy ship into someone's backyard while your friends are setting fires. But details. 2 days later, on August 4th, the Maddox was back, this time with a buddy, the USS Turner Joy. Johnson wanted to prove he wouldn't be intimidated. That night, the weather was terrible. A dark, stormy sea in the Gulf of Tonkin with massive waves and poor visibility. The sonar operators, who were mostly young, inexperienced guys, started getting strange readings, blips on the screen. They reported incoming torpedoes, lots of them. The 2 destroyers spent the next few hours maneuvering wildly, firing hundreds of shells at targets that no one could actually see. Sailors on deck saw flashes and heard bangs, but they were mostly seeing their own ship's gunfire reflecting off the clouds and hearing their own sonar pings. It was a complete panic based on what the military later called freak weather effects and then over-eager sonar man. Up in the chain of command, someone actually had their head on straight. The squadron commander on the scene, Captain John Herrick, was initially caught up in the panic. But as the hours wore on and they failed to find any wreckage, debris, or dead bodies from the supposed 22 torpedoes fired at them, he started to have second thoughts. He sent a now famous cable back to Washington. It said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Hold on a second, everybody. The actual text read, "Review of action makes many reported contacts and torpedoes fired appear doubtful. Freak weather effects on radar and over-eager sonar men may have accounted for many reports." He also noted no actual visual sightings by Maddox. Essentially, he was begging them to double-check before doing anything stupid, a plea for caution. Naturally, it was completely ignored. Back in D.C., the news they wanted to hear arrived hours before Herrick's message of doubt. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara was already briefing the press with unequivocal proof of a second attack. When the cable urging caution did arrive, it was an inconvenient wrinkle in a beautifully simple story, so they just pretended it wasn't that important. President Johnson himself, in a phone call, expressed his own doubts. He famously told an aide, "For all I know, our Navy was shooting at whales out there." He knew the evidence was flimsy. He knew the commander on the scene was skeptical. But the political opportunity was just too good to pass up. The story was already written. They just needed to ignore any facts that contradicted it. This is a time-honored tradition in government called policy-based evidence-making. To seal the deal, the administration needed intelligence, hard proof, and the National Security Agency, the NSA, was happy to provide it. The NSA had intercepted North Vietnamese communications from that night. Initially, this intel was ambiguous and confusing, but that wasn't good enough. So, as a 2005 declassified internal NSA history revealed, officials deliberately skewed the translation and cherry-picked the data. They took fragmented signals and presented them as a coherent story, confirming an attack. For instance, they mistranslated a phrase about losing two comrades in the August 2nd fight to mean the North Vietnamese were confirming they had sent two ships to the August 4th fight. They omitted intercepts that showed the North Vietnamese were confused and looking for their own boats, not attacking American ones. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a willful, deliberate misrepresentation of intelligence to provide a pretext for war. Shocking, I know. Armed with shaky eyewitness accounts they knew were unreliable and intelligence they knew was cooked, Johnson and McNamara went to Congress. They presented the unprovoked attacks as a brave threat to American security. They painted a picture of communist aggression that had to be met with strength. And Congress, with very little debate and almost no critical examination of the evidence, bought it hook, line, and sinker. On August 7th, they passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. It wasn't a declaration of war. Oh no, it was something much more useful. It gave the president the authority to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack and prevent further aggression. In short, it was a blank check to wage war in Southeast Asia for as long as he wanted, however he wanted. The House passed it 416-0. The Senate passed it 88-2. With his brand new permission slip, LBJ wasted no time. Within hours of the congressional vote, American planes were in the air. Operation Pierce Arrow was the retaliatory bombing campaign against North Vietnam. 64 bombing sorties were launched against torpedo boat bases and an oil storage facility. It was the first overt, large-scale bombing of the North by the United States. It was the moment the conflict went from a simmering proxy spat to a full-blown American war. The escalation was immediate and massive. Hundreds of thousands of American troops would eventually be sent to Vietnam. The entire conflict, a decade of bloodshed that would cost millions of lives and tear American society apart, was kicked into high gear. All based on nervous sailors shooting at bad weather and politicians who heard exactly what they wanted to hear. The truth about the Gulf of Tonkin incident didn't exactly rush out. It dribbled out over decades. Key figures involved started admitting the obvious long after it mattered. Robert McNamara, the architect of the escalation, admitted in the 1990s that the second attack probably did not occur. A truly comforting thought from the man who sent a generation to war. Other officers and sailors came forward, confirming they never saw any enemy boats on August 4th. But the real smoking gun was the declassification of those internal NSA histories in the mid-2000s, which confirmed the deliberate manipulation of intelligence. It took over 40 years for the full story to become public record. 40 years after the lie was used to authorize a war. This demonstrates a wonderful feature of government secrecy. The truth often gets declassified just in time for everyone who was responsible to be retired or dead. So, why does a 40-year-old lie about bad weather still matter? Because the Gulf of Tonkin resolution created a template. It established the precedent of a president gaining broad war-making powers from Congress based on questionable emergency intelligence, bypassing a formal declaration of war. It's a model that has been admired and occasionally repeated. The idea that you can manufacture consent for a conflict by presenting skewed intelligence as fact is unfortunately a timeless political strategy. It's a powerful lesson in how easily a nation can be led into a catastrophic conflict, not by a single grand lie, but by a series of small deceptions, convenient omissions, and the overwhelming desire of powerful people to believe in a simple, useful story. The story of the Gulf of Tonkin is the story of how the fog of war can be generated on purpose long before any shots are fired. Humans have always been great at this. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!